Hey, welcome to this exciting tutorial on JSON. So this is a crash course on JSON, on the essentials that you need to know about JSON. So what exactly is JSON? Now, JSON is a language that was designed to work with JavaScript. That's why there's actually JavaScript in the name of JSON. So it stands for JavaScript Object Notation. This is what JSON stands for. So it's JavaScript Object Notation, like that. Yeah, the S is this one here. So what does this mean? Why do we need JSON and how do we use it? Now, the reason we need JSON is simple: data transfer, data saving and data transfer. It makes it easier to transfer data using JSON. So let me explain a little bit. So I'll use this advanced paint program. So now imagine you have two computers, right? You have two computers here. Let me close that. Oh, it doesn't want to close. Okay, there we go. I found what I was looking for, the brush. Okay, so let's say you have a computer here. And this computer is running a program in C++. And then you have another computer here that's running something in PHP, for example. Okay, now both C++ and PHP have a way to represent data, user data, for example. It can be any kind of data. So C++ may use arrays, and also PHP uses arrays, but they are not designed exactly the same because of the systems are different. So an array in C++ cannot be read by PHP. So how can we find a way for them to both communicate this information? So since these are two computers, we can have two wires passing through here to send the data from one system to the next. But the problem is, if we send the data as it is, PHP will not understand what it is. So instead, what we do is we use JSON as the middleman. So what we do instead is we say, convert our array from C++ into JSON. Okay, so once we convert it to JSON, then we can send it to PHP, and then PHP will convert it back to an array that it understands itself. Okay, so this is only possible because both PHP and C++ understand what JSON is, so they can read what JSON is. So whatever data is written inside as JSON, C++ can read and PHP can read. So this is a much easier way to communicate data instead of having to change C++ and PHP to make them compatible with each other. That cannot happen because they are just totally different languages that work in a totally different way. So having a middleman like JSON solves the problem, because both of them can just send data as JSON and convert it, and vice versa. Okay, now JSON is not just about communication between two systems. Sometimes you want to save your data. Okay, let's say you want to save data in your PHP application. So let's say you have a few arrays, you have a few objects in there, and you want to save them. Well, if the power is removed from your PC, then PHP will lose the data, but you can send your data to a file as JSON. Okay, now the reason you would do this is because JSON is in a string format. So JSON is just strings. Now strings can easily be saved as text files. So essentially what you're doing is you're converting all your arrays and your objects and all that data into a text file and then saving it. So JSON is just text, that's what it is. And then when you need it, you get that information as text, then convert it back into an array that your program will understand. Okay, so let's see how we can actually convert our data into JSON. How do we do that? Well, first of all, let's look at the JSON format. How are things saved as strings? So imagine you want to save arrays as strings. How would you do it? So for example, if you're creating your own system to save data from, let's say from your PHP application. You want to save the data onto the file and then be able to recreate the array that you had originally before you sent the data to file. So you have to save it in a way that is recognizable and can be easy to read back. So let's take, for example, you want to save a few names. So there are people, maybe you have some workers and you want to save them. So that can be very simple. You can just create a file and save them one name after the other. So you can just say John and then put a comma, Mary, put a comma, Peter, like that. Ooh, there we go. So this is valid. So you can have 1,000 names and you can save them like this. And if this was an array, if I read this file back, I can simply tell PHP that wherever there's a comma here, this is an item, this is an item. Ignore the commas, they just represent array items. So that is very straightforward. But then you get a problem if, for example, you want to save a sentence instead of just names. So let's say, for example, you say Mary is a very, comma, very bad girl. Something like this. So here you have John, which is fine, there's a comma, and then there's Mary is a very, and then here this comma is part of the sentence, right? But the system was going to read it as this is one item and this is another item. This will cause a problem because now when we saved it, this was one sentence, but when reading it back, now we have two sentences, which is not what we want. So to solve this problem, you could put these items inside quotes like that, okay? That way it can tell that the string ends where the quotation marks are. So for as long as there's a quote in there, this is a different string, and this is one string, sorry, as long as there's quotation marks there at the end. So it will look for that quote at the end. But then you get another problem. So let's say you want to save information that says Mary's father, like that. Then now you have another problem because now this looks like one string and this looks like probably another string. And then because this tick and that tick are taken by this one, what happens to this? So you see another problem arise here. Now we can solve this problem by simply replacing these guys with double quotes, like so. And then here we put a single quote as usual. Oops. So now, as you can see, because we have double quotes on these ones, then we can leave the single quote to be part of the sentence. So this is still readable. Oh, let me close that there. So this is one string still, and you can easily see that. That's another string, and that's another string. Okay. Now imagine you want to have several sets of data. You want a list for one town or one company, and you want another list of names for another company. So how do you save that? Now that becomes a problem because if I just keep saving names here, I can't tell if these names are from the same company or a different company. So what I could do is I could put square brackets like so. This will group my data into several groups. So here I can have John, Mary's father, and Peter in one company, and then I can have Mike there and a book maybe or something. I've run out of names to say. So as you can see now, there's one list here and there's another list there. So this kind of makes sense, right? One list here, one list there. Now there's a final problem that we get, and what is that final problem? Is what if we need key value pairs? Let's say I want this data to just be about John and I want this data to just be about Mike. So let's say this is John and that's his age, 24, and this is his comment, or maybe hobbies. Let's try hobbies like that. So we can clearly see this is John's data. This is his name, this is his age, and this is hobbies. So this can be a representation of his data, same as Mike can have a representation of his data there with his hobbies. Okay, makes sense, right? then in order for us to know where this starts and ends, we can put a comma in between like that. So this is one item, this is another set. So this can be one array and another array there. But another problem arises. How do we know what this 24 means? Is it his age? Because if you save the data and then come back weeks later, maybe your program will be able to tell what that data is because it's hard-coded there. You know that the second item is the age. But if I just gave this data to somebody who has never used my system, they will not know what that 24 means. They'll just see John, they'll guess, okay, maybe that's a name. But what is this 24? Is that his bank account balance? Is it his age? Is it his height? What exactly is that 24? So this is where it's important to have key value pairs. Okay, so you have a key and then you have a value. Now instead of using square brackets, let's use curly brackets like that. Oh, I'm making things worse. So I'll put curly bracket there and again curly bracket there like this. Okay, now the reason why I'm using curly brackets is because that's the standard for JSON. Okay, I'm just using it as an example here. They do use square brackets, but for a whole different reason. So I'll explain what that is. So here, what I can do now is I can say name like so, and then put a full colon like that, and say John. So you see here there's name, and then there's a full colon, and there's John. So this means this is the key, this is the separator, and this is the value. Okay. The reason we put the key in quotes as well is to avoid similar things that we're running away when putting from when putting quotes even on the values. Same thing. So we say name and then comma there. We say sorry, age like that, 24, and then hobbies, and then we can put my hobbies or singing or something like singing like this. So let me come back here a bit. Okay, so now instead of representing it like this so that we can read it as humans, I would do it this way. Okay, it just makes it a little bit more readable like that. I'll move that a bit. Let's move that, let's move that, let's move that. Okay, so at least now, don't mind this part, just look at this part here. So at least now we have a key and a value. So now I know that this represents the name, this represents the age, and this is a hobby. So this is good. At least now we are getting closer to representing our array as it is and bringing it back. Now, since this is a list of these objects, this is like one item or one object, this is another item, one object. Now in order to encapsulate all of them, I will put them in the square brackets like so. So the square brackets represents an array, the curly brackets represent an object. So this is how JSON kinda looks like. Okay, so let me show you how an actual JSON file looks like. So I will load this file. You can find this file in the link in the description, so do not be fiery. I will drop it in my Sublime text. There we go. Now this file has an extension of .json at the end, so JSON, so the name and then .json. Now I must mention that you don't need to save it as .json. You don't, because as long as it's text and it's in this format, it will be recognized as JSON. The only reason I'm saving it as .json is because if I load it in Sublime Text, it highlights the text accordingly, and it will show me if I make an error. For example, if I remove this, you see I get this red thing here because it understands that this is JSON. Okay, so clearly from what we have done so far, you can see that this is a list of data where this is ID 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then there's first name, that's the name, last name, email, gender, IP address. So all this data is easy to read, and that's how JSON is saved. Now if you notice, this is a curly bracket and that, and then a comma. So this is an object, another object, and because there's a square bracket, it means the whole thing is an array of objects. So let's see how we can actually use some software to read this data and get exactly what we want. But before we do that, let me explain the data types that are allowed in JSON. So let's go to the first item here, and I'm going to just duplicate this. So items that are required, you see this is a number, it's highlighted. It's different from this because this has inverted commas here. So if you put this in quotes, it becomes a string. So if I do this, this is no longer a number, it's a string, it's some text. But this is a number here. That's a number, this is a string, it's not a number. So you can also add values like no, like that, that is valid. You can also add true, or you can add false, that is acceptable. So true, false, no, and numbers and text. So that's how far it goes. So let me take it back to how it was. Very good. So if you're going to save something like a date or something like that, you'd have to put it in quotes. Now you only have to worry about such things if you're going to type the JSON by hand. So the way I'm typing the JSON right now, so I can type it by hand, save it, and any program that reads JSON will be able to understand what I was doing here. So this is like creating an array of objects. But what we will do is use how it was intended to be used by other software to convert it back and forth. So I'm going to start by using PHP, right? So in order to be able to run PHP on your system, you need to install this program, which is XAMPP. So just download XAMPP and install it on your system, and then open the control panel. Once you install, there will be this control panel, and right here where it says Apache, click start at the beginning here. So for as long as the Apache is green, you are good to go. So you can use other servers like WAMP, MAMP, similar things, but I recommend this one. And so I'm going to create a new file here, which I've created, new file, and I'm going to save it in a folder. So I've saved this in drive C, XAMPP, htdocs. Now htdocs is the server folder. Now for those of you that don't know, XAMPP is a server, so we are pretending that we are running the internet on our very own system. So that's why we're using that. So inside htdocs, create a folder called JSON. You can really name it anything you want, and I will save the page as index.php there. Okay, so let's put our PHP tags and see how we can manipulate JSON data. So first of all, I will copy the data. Now, the data doesn't have to be in a file, it can be out in the open here. So I'll say my string is equal to, then so I have to put single quotes because to encapsulate the whole thing, because JSON uses double quotes, so I don't want the double quotes outside to interfere with the ones inside, so I'll use single quotes instead and paste the data inside there. Save. Okay, so now if I go to that same folder and I'll drag and drop it in my browser. I actually had some other JSON data here. Oh, there we go. So I've dragged and dropped it in my browser. Refresh. Now in order for the server to be able to run, I will replace everything from the start of the link to htdocs with a localhost. Okay, so we see an empty page, no errors, then things are good. Now let's echo it out. Let's say echo my string. So all I'm doing is I declare the string and I just want to display it. And there we go. No surprise there because this is exactly the text that we assigned it to. But I want to convert it to JSON. So, oh, not to JSON. It's already JSON. I want to convert it into an object I can use in PHP. So I'll say obj, I'll call it obj, short for object, is equal to. Now the function I use is JSON decode. Okay. Now there are two functions here. There's JSON decode and JSON encode. So JSON encode works when you want to get an object or an array and you want to turn it into some string, JSON string, so you can save it. But JSON decode works if you want to get the string and convert it back to an object or an array. So once we've done that, we can't use echo anymore. We have to use print r, and we want to print r the object. So say obj. So watch closely here as this data changes. If I refresh, now you can see it says array, standard class object, but let's put some pre-tags so we can see much more clearly. So I will echo some pre-tags here, like that. Okay, so now that looks much better, doesn't it? So I can see now that I have an array outside, and then inside the array I have objects. This is an object, that's an object, that's an object, but the main thing is an array, which is exactly what we expected because we have square brackets. Let me come here. We have square brackets on the outside, which mean an array, and then these curly brackets means objects. But with PHP, you can still decide to only have arrays if you want. By here in the function JSON decode, you can put a comma and put true, which will tell it to convert everything to an array instead of an object. So if I refresh now, I only have arrays. Now with this that I've done here, I can get the name, the first name only if I want to. So let's see how we can do that. Now I don't want to get this data here. I want to get it from the file. Now this JSON data file is in exactly the same folder as the index.php page. So which means I can get it, load it from the file. So I will use the function file get contents and then put the file name in there, which is what's the file name? Data.json. So nothing will change here. Same thing, you won't see a difference here. Same. But the advantage is now that this is an object, I can actually loop through it. It's an array of objects. So let's loop through it. I'll say for each, like so. And that one is object. So there's key and there's value. Now the value in this case is an object. Okay. So it's kind of like a row like that. Oh, it's not an object because we put true here. So it's just arrays. So it's object as row. So that's a row there. I don't really need the key here, so I can remove it. Now inside that row, I can tell it to echo one item. So I can say echo the first name underscore name. Now if I didn't put true here, I would have to use the object notation here. So let me add to this. Let me put a break tag so that each name will be shown on a different line. So refresh, and there you see I only have the first names because that's what I selected here. If I wanted, I could put last names as well, put a space there and then put last here. Then we get first name and last name. Okay, easy to manipulate, right? So if I had not put true here, I would need to use object notation here, which is the arrows like that, and remove that from there. So let's try that. Boom, no difference. And in order to save this to a JSON file again, to save this object, all I need to do is say maybe save data is equal to JSON encode. So like I said, encoding is creating a string, and then we'll say file put contents. So what is the file name we'll give it? We'll just say data2.json, and then what is the data? We've saved the data into the variable called save, and that's it. So if I come to my JSON folder here, you see that there are only two files here. There's data.json and index.php. But once I run this, I'll get more files in there. So now I have 3 files with data2. So let's see what's inside data2 now. And there we go. So it's not properly formatted to be clear to read the way we had done with the other file. But you can see that it's the same data that has been sent here, only that it's on one line this time. So that's how you deal with things in PHP. But JSON is meant for JavaScript, right? It's right there in the name. So how do you deal with it in JavaScript? Let's explore that. So in order to use JSON in JavaScript, let's create a JavaScript file here, shall we? So I will remove, because I can't do file get contents using I can't use file get contents in JavaScript, so I will remove this and put and I can't use all this actually, so remove all that. Remove the PHP tags as well. Let's put HTML tags instead. We'll name it JSON. So I will use the body as my item to display my data. And then here I will put some script tags, so I can put some JavaScript in there. So let me move that here. And then in JavaScript, this is not how we declare file variables. We do that. Now I can leave the $. This is a valid variable, but let's do it like that. So I go to the JSON data, select all of it, and put it in here. Now, because in JavaScript you can't do many lines like this, so instead of the single quotes, I will put the backtick, and then come down here and put the backtick as well. It's the key right next to one above tab key. Okay, so there we go. So we have that item. Now if I refresh my page, I shouldn't see anything. Now if, however, I grab the body and tell it to dump all this data from my string into the body, then we can see it. So let's see that. I will say document.body. The inner HTML, that's what we want to change, is equal to my string. And that's it, actually. If I refresh, you see the data there. But let's show the data as an actual object. How do we turn that data into an object? So that's simple as well. I'll say variable obj is equal to JSON. So these in capital letters like that, dot parse. So there are two methods for JSON that do this. One is parse, one is stringify, like that. So what stringify does is it gets an object and turns it back into a string for saving or for sending to another application. And then parse does the opposite. It gets this string and converts it back to an object. So now that we are putting my string in here, what I want to put in the other side is object. So let's see what that does. So as you can see, it's showing me that there's an array object of an array object like that, which is cool, showing that it worked. But I want to loop through the created array. Okay, so I'll use the for loop here. I'll say for and then use obj there. So it will loop through the length of the obj, the object here, and then while we are in there, I want to get all the IDs. So all I need to do is say, let me use this same thing here and delete that, put it there, Now I don't want to replace the old content, so I'll put plus equals and then obj.id. Let's try that. So I'm just supposed to see the IDs 1, 2, 4. So as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4. But for us to see them on separate lines, let me add a break tag. So that we see that they are individual numbers. Or instead, we can use first name underscore name. There we go. Now keep in mind that these are objects, so you don't have to use the dot notation. You can use the square brackets like that and put them in quotes. So this time I won't see a difference. There we go. Now, in order to convert this back, so at this point we have this obj, which is an object. So if I try to do a console.log here, document dot, I want to use console.log, I'll just use body dot inner HTML is equal to let me mute that. So I just wanted to show me what obj is, like we had done before. So it's an object. But what if I stringify it? So I say JSON dot stringify. Then it becomes a string. So there we go. You see it again now. It's the same data, but now it's been converted from an object to a string, ready to be saved, and then we can read it back later on. All right, so yeah, this is how we do it. This is how we read and write to JSON data, either in JavaScript or in PHP. So of course, the JSON data here doesn't always come from a variable. It will come from a file that is on the server, just like this JSON data is. But that is beyond the scope of this video, but I can just show you a trick here, how it could be done. Let me do this. So here, instead of putting the data in there, what I want to do is read the data from, so let me remove that. Let me leave that there. I want it to show first name. Let me copy that, duplicate. Oh, sorry there, wrong button. So I want the first name and repeat it to the last name there. But in between here, I want to put some space. And then add like that. And then this one will be last name. This way I want to see the first name and last names. Save. Okay. So here, let's put 2 quotes, empty. Okay, so how do we collect the data for my string? Now we're going to use what is called an AJAX call. So don't pay too much attention to this part because I'm just showing you that you can get data from the server, but the lesson is already over here. You've already seen how JSON actually works to transfer data between 2 systems. But now I want to show you how you can get data from the server using AJAX. So you can say var, we're going to call our AJAX call. Let's just call it AJAX. Now AJAX is something else. It's not part of JSON, no. So don't mind this. This AJAX is just asynchronous JavaScript, XML and XML, JavaScript and XML, something like that. Yeah. So that's the technology we're using here. But I can call this thing anything. So I'll just say variable A is equal to new. I want to create a new XML HTTP request like that. So I'm making an HTTP request to the server to give me a specific file. So what file do I need? So first of all, I'll say a.open, so I can open the port, and I want to send it as a get variable like that. Then what file am I looking for? The file is named data.json. And do I want this to open asynchronously? Yes, I'll put true like that. Or you can leave out this whole part, it doesn't really matter. Let me just leave it out. And then let me send the data. So say a.send like that. I'm not really sending anything. I want to receive instead. So I'll just do that, send an empty, but I need to listen up for the result. Yes. So how do I get the result? I'll just say a.onload when it loads properly. Let's create a function to handle that result. And let me put E to capture the event. So I'm just going to say if a dot status is equal to 200, status 200 just means everything is okay, or a dot ready state is equal to 4. Ready state 4 just means the result has been returned. And so what's this here? So here is where I get my result. So that result here, what I will say is I will put all this code in here. Once I get a result, wait, I want to get everything here, cat, and put that code in here. So I'm putting it in there because that's where all the results are happening. I get result in there. Okay, so once we get the result, the object is equal to, so my string has to be set to something, so to the result. So my string is equal to the result of all this, which is a.response text, like that. Yeah, and that's it. Then I can put my first name and last name there. So let me come back to here and refresh. Okay, so I don't get my result. So let me check what was the problem. There's a syntax error, invalid assignment on left hand side. Where is this? If status is equal to 200 and a.ready state. Oh, so that part is wrong, is it? Where is this? Okay, so here that's where the problem is. I forgot one equal sign. So my bad, my bad, my bad. Now if I refresh, I get all the names from the file, right? Now to prove that I'm getting this from the file, I can change the very first name here to something more recognizable. Like that. Anything really, so that we can see it there. And there we go. You can see it changed there. So as you can see now, the data is being transferred from the server, which could be running PHP, for example, and then the front end, which is the browser, could be running JavaScript, because that's what we are running here. And still, we are able to communicate between the two systems from JavaScript to PHP and back. Okay, so I hope you have learned something here about JSON. The only thing you have to really take back from this is how the JSON structure looks like, which is this one here. Once you get this, then you understand what JSON is about. Okay, so I'll see you in another tutorial.